He thought turning her away would be quick, forgettable, but in a matter of minutes, it would become the most expensive mistake of his career. The boutique shimmered under soft golden lights, glass shelves reflecting rows of designer handbags priced higher than most people's monthly rent. The marble floors polished so perfectly they mirrored every step like a quiet stage. And into that world walked Emily Carter, her simple white blouse neatly pressed, her jeans modest and unbranded, her shoes comfortable rather than stylish, yet her posture calm, her eyes steady, as if she belonged exactly where she stood, even if no one else believed it. Conversations softened as she passed, not out of respect but curiosity. A few glances exchanged between customers dressed in tailored suits and high-end dresses, their expressions subtle but unmistakable, the kind of silent judgment that didn't need words to sting. Behind the counter, Vanessa Blake noticed her immediately, her lips tightening just slightly, her gaze sweeping over Emily from head to toe in a practiced motion she had perfected over years of deciding who was worth her time and who was not. And in that instant, Emily had already been placed into a category she would not be allowed to escape. Emily paused near a display, her fingers gently brushing the strap of a handbag, her touch careful, respectful, as if she understood the craftsmanship behind it. And for a moment, she simply observed, taking in the stitching, the design, the quiet elegance, but that moment didn't last. Vanessa approached with a measured stride, heels clicking sharply against the marble, each step echoing through the boutique like a signal that something was about to shift. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polished on the surface but edged with something colder underneath, something dismissive. Emily looked up, offering a small, polite smile. "Yes, I was hoping to take a closer look at this one," she said softly, her voice steady, her words simple. But Vanessa didn't move to assist her, didn't reach for the bag, didn't acknowledge the request in any meaningful way. Instead, her eyes narrowed just enough to make the air feel heavier. "That item is part of our premium collection," she replied, her voice lowering slightly, as if explaining something obvious, something Emily should have already known, and a nearby customer glanced over, sensing the shift in tone, the beginning of something uncomfortable. Emily's smile didn't fade, though a flicker of awareness passed through her eyes, the kind that came from having lived this moment before, more times than she could count. "I understand," she said quietly, still calm, still composed. But Vanessa took a step closer, her posture straightening, her authority becoming more visible. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable browsing our outlet location," she added, her words light but cutting, and this time, a faint murmur rippled through the room, the kind of reaction that builds when people realize they are witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing but can't look away from. Emily's hand slowly withdrew from the bag, her fingers curling slightly as she let it go, and for a brief second, the boutique felt smaller, quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. "I'd prefer to see this one," Emily replied, her voice still gentle, but now there was something else beneath it, something steady, something unshaken, and Vanessa's expression tightened, her patience thinning as she glanced around, aware of the attention gathering, aware that this moment needed to end quickly, decisively. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," she said, her tone no longer pretending, no longer softened, and then, with a small, dismissive gesture toward the door, she added, "This store caters to a very specific clientele." The words hung in the air like a quiet verdict, and for a heartbeat, no one moved, no one spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to make it unmistakable. Emily stood there, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, her eyes steady, and in that stillness, something shifted, something unseen, something that no one in that room, not Vanessa, not the watching customers, not even the security guard near the entrance, could possibly have predicted, because far outside, beyond the glass doors, a low engine hum was just beginning to echo against the street. The faint hum outside grew louder, subtle at first, almost easy to ignore, but then it deepened into something unmistakable, a low, powerful engine that did not belong to the usual city traffic, and though no one had turned yet, the sound alone began to pull attention toward the glass doors like an invisible thread. Inside the boutique, Vanessa held her posture, her chin slightly raised, her expression firm, But there was a flicker now, something small and uncertain that passed through her eyes before she quickly buried it beneath practiced composure. Emily remained still, her hands resting calmly at her sides, her breathing even, her gaze not on Vanessa but somewhere beyond, as if she already knew something the rest of the room did not. A customer near the entrance shifted slightly, glancing toward the street, curiosity breaking through the tension, and then another followed, until a quiet ripple of attention began to spread. The polished glass doors reflected the interior lights, making it difficult to see clearly outside, but shadows moved, shapes forming, and then the sleek silhouette of a black SUV eased into view, its surface gleaming under the afternoon sun, its presence commanding without a single word. The engine idled for a brief moment, deep and controlled, before it went silent, and that silence felt heavier than the sound itself, pressing into the room, filling the space between breaths. Vanessa's eyes flickered toward the door now, just for a second, before she forced her attention back to Emily, unwilling to lose control of the moment she had created. As I said, she continued, her voice sharper now, trying to reclaim authority, we maintain a certain standard here. But her words did not carry the same weight as before, because the room was no longer fully listening to her. Outside, the driver's side door remained closed, but the rear door slowly opened with a smooth, deliberate motion, the kind that spoke of precision, of habit, of a life where timing and control mattered. A pair of polished shoes touched the pavement, followed by a man stepping out with measured ease, his movements calm, unhurried, yet undeniably commanding. He adjusted his jacket slightly, his posture straight, his presence alone enough to shift the energy of the street, and even through the glass, there was something about him that made people look twice, something that could not be easily explained but was instantly recognized. Inside, the first customer near the entrance straightened, eyes widening just a fraction, recognition dawning quietly, and then another followed, their expressions changing in subtle but undeniable ways. Vanessa noticed it then, the shift she could not control, the attention slipping away from her, and for the first time, her confidence wavered. Emily did not turn. She did not need to. Her expression remained composed, her shoulders relaxed, as if the outcome had never been in question, as if this moment was simply unfolding exactly as it was meant to. The boutique, once filled with soft conversation and quiet judgment, now held a different kind of silence, one that carried anticipation instead of dismissal, one that waited. The glass doors opened with a soft mechanical sound, and as the man stepped inside, the light from the street framed him briefly before settling, revealing a tailored suit, a calm expression, and eyes that moved through the room with quiet precision. He did not speak immediately. He did not need to, because in that single instant, the balance of power shifted completely, and though Vanessa had not yet found the words to respond, she could already feel it slipping away from her, piece by piece, as the room began to understand what she had failed to see. The moment he stepped inside, the air itself seemed to shift, subtle but undeniable, like a quiet current moving through the room, and every eye that had once dismissed Emily now turned toward him, drawn by something they could not ignore, something that demanded attention without ever asking for it. His gaze moved calmly across the boutique, taking in the polished displays, the frozen expressions, the tension that still lingered in the silence, and then it settled on Emily, steady and familiar, as if she was the only thing in the room that truly mattered. Vanessa felt it immediately, that shift in focus, that invisible line being drawn, and, for the first time, uncertainty crept into her posture, her shoulders tightening just slightly as she tried to regain control of a situation that was no longer hers. "Sir, welcome," she said quickly, her voice changing, smoothing out into something far more attentive, far more respectful than before. But the words came a fraction too late, the tone too forced, and it did not go unnoticed. The man did not respond right away. Instead, he walked forward with measured steps, each one quiet against the marble floor, yet somehow louder than any voice in the room. And as he moved closer, recognition began to spread, not loudly, not dramatically, but in small, quiet realizations, a glance here, a whisper there, the kind of understanding that grows in seconds but feels like a revelation. A customer near the display lowered her phone slowly, her expression shifting from casual interest to something sharper, something aware, while another man straightened his jacket instinctively, as if presence alone demanded it. Vanessa followed his approach with her eyes, her mind racing now, searching for something familiar, something she had seen before, and then it clicked, not all at once, but in a slow, sinking realization that tightened her chest. She had seen him in articles, in interviews, in carefully framed photographs that spoke of success and influence, and now he was standing here, in front of her, not as an image, not as a distant figure, but as a presence she had just unknowingly disrespected. Emily still had not turned. She did not rush toward him, did not call out, did not change her posture in any visible way, and that stillness spoke louder than anything else, because it carried a quiet confidence that could not be performed. The man stopped a few steps away from her, close enough now that the connection between them became unmistakable, not through words, but through the ease of their presence, the familiarity that did not need to be explained. "Emily," he said softly, his voice calm, grounded, and the sound of her name in that moment landed differently, carrying weight, carrying meaning, carrying a truth that the room had not yet fully grasped. Vanessa's breath caught almost imperceptibly, her hands tightening at her sides as the final pieces fell into place, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. Emily turned then, slowly, her expression composed, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding, and in that simple exchange, everything shifted completely. There was no surprise in her gaze, no urgency, only a calm acknowledgement, as if she had expected this moment all along. Around them, the boutique held its breath, every movement paused, every whisper stilled, as the reality of what had just happened began to settle over the room like a quiet storm. Vanessa opened her mouth, as if to speak, to correct, to fix what could still be fixed, but no words came, because in that moment, she understood something she could not undo, something that had already changed the course of everything. And standing there, just feet away from the woman she had dismissed, she realized that the mistake she thought was small, the decision she believed was routine, had already become something far greater than she could control, something that was now unfolding in front of everyone, one silent second at a time. Daniel did not raise his voice, did not rush, did not display even a hint of anger, yet the quiet authority in his presence carried more weight than any confrontation ever could, and as he stood beside Emily, the contrast between what Vanessa had assumed and what now stood before her became impossible to ignore. His eyes moved briefly across the boutique once more, not with curiosity, but with a calm awareness, as if he had already understood everything that had taken place without needing a single explanation. And when his gaze returned to Vanessa, it held steady, unblinking, not harsh, but undeniable. Vanessa felt her throat tighten, the confidence she had relied on moments ago now slipping through her grasp, replaced by something unfamiliar, something closer to hesitation. "I was not aware we had such distinguished guests today," she said quickly, forcing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, her tone now careful, almost rehearsed, as if she could reshape the past few minutes simply by changing how she spoke in the present. But the room remembered. The silence remembered. Daniel took one small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the interaction unavoidable, and though his movement was minimal, it carried a quiet finality. "My wife asked to see a bag," he said, his voice even, controlled, each word clear and deliberate, and the simplicity of the statement made it heavier, because it stripped away every excuse, every layer of justification Vanessa might have tried to build. Vanessa nodded quickly, almost too quickly, her hands moving as if to correct the moment, to repair it. "Of course, I would be more than happy to assist her," she replied, her voice softening, shifting entirely. But there was a tremor now, a subtle break in the polished surface she had maintained so effortlessly before. Emily watched her calmly, her expression unchanged, her posture still composed, and that calmness carried its own quiet strength, because it showed that nothing in her had been shaken, nothing in her had been diminished by what had happened. Around them, the customers stood still, no longer pretending to browse, no longer whispering, their attention fully captured, not by drama, but by the unfolding realization of what they were witnessing. Daniel did not look at the bag. He did not look at the displays. His focus remained on Vanessa, and in that stillness, the imbalance became undeniable. She was told this store maintains a certain standard. He continued, not raising his voice, not changing his tone, but the words echoed in the room, repeating what had already been said, placing it back into the space where it could not be ignored. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, her breath catching as she searched for a response, something to soften the statement, something to redirect it, but nothing came fast enough. Nothing came strong enough to undo what had already been heard by everyone in the room. There must have been a misunderstanding, she said finally, her voice quieter now, less certain. And for the first time, she avoided direct eye contact, her gaze dropping just slightly before lifting again, as if she could not fully hold his. Emily shifted her weight gently, a small movement that drew attention not through force, but through presence, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, carrying neither anger nor resentment, only clarity. There was no misunderstanding, she said, and the simplicity of her words settled over the room like a quiet truth. The boutique remained still, the polished surfaces, the golden lights, the carefully arranged displays now feeling different, as if the illusion of exclusivity had been quietly stripped away, revealing something far less refined beneath. Vanessa stood there, her composure thinning with each passing second, the realization settling deeper, heavier, as she understood that the moment she thought she controlled had already slipped beyond her reach. Daniel's expression did not change, but there was something final in the way he stood, something that made it clear that what happened next would not be about raising voices or creating a scene, but about something far more lasting, something that would remain long after the silence in that room was broken. Daniel let the silence stretch just long enough for every word to settle, for every eye in the boutique to absorb what had been said, and when he finally spoke again, his voice remained calm, almost quiet, yet it carried a weight that pressed into the room with unmistakable clarity. Standards are important, he said evenly, his gaze steady on Vanessa. But they reveal more about the people who enforce them than the people they judge. The words were not sharp, not raised, yet they landed with precision, and the effect was immediate, a subtle shift in posture among those watching, a quiet acknowledgement passing through the room, as if something unspoken had just been confirmed. Vanessa swallowed, her composure thinning further as she forced a nod, her hands clasping lightly in front of her as though she could hold herself together through sheer control. Of course, she replied, her voice softer now, almost careful. We strive to provide the best experience for all of our clients. But even as she spoke, the sentence sounded hollow, as if the meaning behind it had already been stripped away. Emily's eyes remained on her, calm and unwavering, not accusatory, not harsh, but impossibly steady, and that steadiness seemed to unsettle Vanessa more than any anger could have. For a brief moment, no one moved. The boutique caught in a stillness that felt almost suspended in time, the polished displays and warm lighting now serving as a quiet backdrop to something far more real. Then Daniel turned slightly, his attention shifting just enough to break the tension, but not to dismiss it. Emily, he said gently, his tone softening as he addressed her. Did you find what you were looking for? The question was simple, almost ordinary, yet in that moment it carried something deeper, a reminder that the situation had never been about proving anything, never been about confrontation, but about something far more fundamental. Emily glanced briefly at the display, then back at him, her expression composed, her voice calm. No, she said quietly, I did not. The simplicity of her answer echoed more than any explanation could have, because it spoke not only of the item she had been denied, but of the experience itself, the moment that had already defined everything that followed. Daniel nodded once, a small, deliberate gesture, as if that single word had confirmed everything he needed to know. Around them, the customers remained still, the earlier whispers replaced now by a quiet awareness, a recognition that they were witnessing something that would not be forgotten easily. Vanessa shifted her weight again, her eyes flicking briefly toward the display, then back to Daniel, as if searching for an opportunity to correct the situation, to offer something, anything, that might restore balance. Please, she began, her voice tentative now. Allow me to personally assist you both. We have a private viewing area, and I can ensure that you receive our full attention." The offer came quickly, almost urgently, but the change in tone was unmistakable. The same voice that had dismissed now reaching for reconciliation, for acceptance, for a chance to undo what could not be undone. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, and when she finished, he paused for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of consideration, as if weighing not her words, but the meaning behind them. Then he spoke, his voice still calm, still measured. "You had the opportunity to offer that earlier," he said, not accusing, not raising his tone, simply stating a fact that no one in the room could deny. The words settled heavily, not because they were harsh, but because they were true, and truth, in that moment, carried more weight than anything else. Vanessa's shoulders dropped just slightly, the last remnants of her earlier confidence fading as the realization fully set in. There was no argument to make, no explanation that could change what had already happened. Emily remained beside Daniel, her posture steady, her presence quiet but undeniable, and in that quiet, something stronger than confrontation took shape, something that did not need to be forced or declared. Daniel glanced once more around the boutique, taking in the space, the people, the atmosphere that had shifted so completely in such a short time, and then his gaze returned to Vanessa, calm, final, leaving no room for misunderstanding about what had already been decided without a single dramatic gesture, without a raised voice, without anything more than the quiet certainty that respect, once denied, could not simply be offered again when it became convenient. Vanessa stood there with nothing left to say, her carefully practiced confidence now reduced to a fragile silence. And for the first time since Emily had walked into the boutique, she was no longer the one in control of the room. Daniel shifted his gaze slightly, no longer focused on her alone but on the space itself, as if evaluating something far beyond a single interaction, something deeper than a simple mistake. The customers remained still, their earlier curiosity now replaced by quiet reflection, as if each of them was reconsidering what they had just witnessed and what it revealed about more than just one person. Emily took a small step forward, not toward Vanessa, but toward the door, her movement calm and unhurried, and in that moment, it became clear that she had already made her decision. She did not need to raise her voice, did not need to demand anything, because the absence of reaction carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. Vanessa noticed the movement immediately, her expression tightening as a sense of urgency finally broke through her hesitation. "Please, wait," she said, her voice no longer steady, no longer controlled, but edged with something closer to concern. The word echoed slightly in the quiet room, drawing attention once more, but this time it did not command respect, only desperation. Emily paused, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge the sound without giving it power, her posture still composed, her presence still calm. Daniel remained beside her, his stance unchanged, his expression steady, and together they stood as if the moment itself belonged to them now, not through force, but through clarity. Vanessa took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, the sound now carrying a different meaning, no longer authoritative but urgent. "I would like to make this right," she continued, her words coming faster now, as if speed alone could repair what had already been broken. "We value every customer, and I assure you that what happened does not reflect our true standards." The sentence hung in the air, but it lacked conviction, not because the words were wrong, but because they had come too late. Daniel turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers once more, and though his expression remained calm, there was a finality in it that could not be mistaken. "Standards are not defined by words," he said quietly. "They are revealed by actions when no one is watching." The room fell still again, the weight of his statement settling over every polished surface, every silent observer, every unspoken thought. Vanessa's shoulders lowered just a fraction, the last of her resistance fading as the truth of the moment became unavoidable. Emily turned then, fully this time, her eyes meeting Vanessa's not with anger, not with judgment, but with something far more difficult to face, quiet understanding. "You did not see me," she said gently, her voice soft but clear, and those simple words carried more impact than anything else. that had been said, because they spoke not just to the moment, but to the pattern behind it. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but no response came, because there was nothing she could say that would change what those words meant. Emily gave a small nod, not dismissive, not cold, but complete, as if acknowledging that the moment had reached its natural end. Then she turned back toward the door, her steps steady, her posture unchanged, and Daniel followed beside her without hesitation, his presence still calm, still grounded, still unmistakable. As they reached the entrance, the glass doors opened once more, the light from outside spilling into the boutique, and for a brief second, the contrast between the world inside and the world beyond felt clearer than ever. The customers remained where they were, no longer speaking, no longer moving, as if they understood that something significant had just taken place, something that did not need to be explained to be felt. Vanessa stood alone behind the counter, the space around her suddenly larger, quieter, emptier, and as the doors closed behind Emily and Daniel, the silence that followed was not the same as before. It was heavier, deeper, filled with a realization that would linger long after the moment itself had passed, because in that room, under those golden lights, everyone had just witnessed what happens when respect is measured too late. The glass doors closed behind them with a soft click, sealing the silence inside the boutique, but outside, the world felt different, brighter, freer, as if the weight of that moment had never truly belonged to Emily in the first place. The black SUV waited at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon sun, and for a brief second, everything slowed, the city noise muted beneath the quiet presence of something far more grounded. Emily paused just before stepping forward, her gaze drifting slightly, not toward the store, not toward the people still watching from behind the glass, but toward something deeper, something that had shaped her long before this moment ever happened. There had been a time, years ago, when rooms like that had intimidated her, when glances like those had lingered longer, when words like Vanessa's had stayed with her long after she had walked away. She remembered standing in places where she did not feel seen, where worth was measured in appearances, where silence felt like the only response she could offer. But that was not who she was anymore. Daniel watched her quietly, his expression softening just slightly, not because he doubted her, but because he understood exactly what that pause meant, the quiet reflection of someone who had already walked through moments like this and come out stronger on the other side. He did not rush her, did not speak, because he knew she did not need reassurance, only space. Emily took a slow breath, the kind that settles everything inside, and then she stepped forward, her movement steady, her posture unchanged, as if nothing about her had been shaken by what had just occurred. Behind the glass, Vanessa remained where she stood, her figure now smaller, less certain, framed by the same golden lights that had once amplified her authority but now seemed to highlight something else entirely, something quieter, something reflective. The customers inside began to shift, the spell of silence slowly breaking, but their movements were different now, slower, more thoughtful, as if each person carried a piece of what they had just witnessed with them. One woman glanced down at the handbag in her hands, her expression no longer impressed but questioning, while another customer near the counter hesitated before speaking, as if reconsidering the value of what she had come to buy. The boutique itself had not changed, the displays still perfect, the lighting still warm, but something invisible had shifted, something that could not be restored by rearranging shelves or adjusting tone. Outside, Daniel opened the car door for Emily, his gesture simple, respectful, and she met his eyes with a small, knowing smile before stepping in, her movements unhurried, her presence still carrying that same quiet strength. As he closed the door gently and moved around to his side, the engine remained silent, as if even the vehicle itself understood that there was no need for urgency, no need for anything beyond what had already been made clear. Inside the boutique, Vanessa finally moved, her steps slower now, her posture no longer rigid but uncertain, as she looked around at the space she had once controlled so easily. The silence that lingered there was not empty. It was filled with realization, with questions that did not have immediate answers, with a quiet understanding that something important had been revealed in a way that could not be undone. She reached out to adjust one of the handbags on display, her fingers hesitating for just a moment before making contact. and even that small action felt different, as if the meaning behind it had changed. Outside, the SUV engine finally came to life, a low, steady hum that carried none of the tension from before, and as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, it left behind more than just a storefront. It left behind a moment that would linger in the minds of everyone who had been there, a moment that had quietly redefined what it meant to be seen, what it meant to be valued, and what it meant to truly understand the difference between appearance and truth. The city lights began to stretch across the windshield as the SUV moved steadily through the evening traffic, the hum of the engine soft and controlled, matching the quiet atmosphere inside. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been understood without words. Emily leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting toward the passing buildings, their reflections sliding across the glass like fleeting memories. And in that stillness, there was no trace of frustration, no lingering anger, only a calm sense of clarity, as if the moment at the boutique had settled into place exactly where it belonged. Daniel glanced at her briefly, his expression thoughtful, his hands steady on the wheel, and though he had witnessed countless situations where power shifted in far more dramatic ways, there was something about this one that stayed with him, something quieter, something more revealing. "You handled that better than most people would," he said after a moment, his voice low, genuine, carrying neither praise nor surprise, only recognition. Emily's lips curved into a faint smile, not proud, not dismissive, just understanding. "It was not about handling it," she replied softly, her eyes still on the city beyond. "It was about not letting it change who I am." The words settled gently between them, simple yet grounded in something deeper than the situation itself, and Daniel nodded slightly, because he knew that was exactly what made the difference. Outside, the world continued as it always did, people moving, lights shifting, conversations happening in places that would never know what had just taken place inside that boutique. And yet for those who had been there, something had changed in a way that could not be undone. Back at the store, the atmosphere had not returned to normal. Vanessa stood behind the counter, her reflection faintly visible in the glass display, her posture no longer sharp but contemplative, her hands resting lightly on the surface as if she needed something steady to hold on to. The customers had resumed their movements, but the energy was different, quieter, more aware, as if each person carried a silent question with them. A woman who had been browsing earlier placed the handbag she was holding back onto the shelf, her interest gone, replaced by something less tangible but far more significant. While another customer approached the counter slowly, her tone measured, no longer eager, as if the value of the experience itself had shifted in her mind. Vanessa noticed it all, every subtle change, every hesitation, every glance that now held something she had not seen before, and with each passing second, the realization deepened, not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual understanding that settled heavier the longer it stayed. She replayed the moment in her mind, the words she had chosen, the tone she had used, the assumptions she had made without question, and for the first time, she saw them clearly, not as routine, not as standard, but as something else entirely, something that had been invisible to her until now. The boutique still shone under the same warm lights, the displays still perfect, the atmosphere still designed to impress. But beneath that surface, something had shifted, something that no amount of adjustment could immediately fix. Outside, the SUV slowed at a traffic light, the red glow reflecting softly across the dashboard, and Emily glanced down briefly, her hand resting lightly in her lap, her posture relaxed, grounded, unchanged. She had walked into that boutique the same person she was now, and she had walked out the same way, untouched in the ways that mattered, and that, more than anything else, was the quiet victory that no one inside could fully comprehend. The light turned green, and the vehicle moved forward once more, steady and certain, leaving behind a place that would continue to reflect on what had happened long after they were gone. Because some lessons do not arrive loudly, they arrive in silence, in stillness, in moments where everything slows just long enough for the truth to be seen clearly, and once it is seen, it cannot be unseen. The city stretched on around them, steady and unchanged, but somewhere behind glass and polished marble, a different kind of stillness lingered, one that would not fade with closing hours or dimmed lights. Back inside the boutique, the evening crowd had thinned, leaving behind a quieter space, but not a calmer one, because the silence that remained was heavier now, filled with thoughts that could not be ignored. Vanessa stood alone near the counter, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting long reflections across the glass displays, and for the first time in a long while, she was not thinking about sales, not thinking about appearances, but about a moment she could not undo. She replayed it again, not the arrival of the black SUV, not the presence of Daniel, but the very beginning, the instant she chose to judge without knowing, the second she decided who belonged and who did not, and each time she reached that point, the realization felt sharper, clearer, more unavoidable. Across the room, a junior associate adjusted a display with quiet hands, her movements careful, thoughtful, as if she had learned something without being taught, while another employee spoke softly to a customer, her tone noticeably different. More attentive, more aware, as though the standard they believed they upheld had finally been understood for what it truly was meant to be. The boutique itself had not changed in appearance, but something beneath it had shifted, something subtle yet permanent, something that would shape every interaction that followed, whether acknowledged or not. Vanessa moved slowly along the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of the polished surface, her reflection following beside her, and she paused for a moment, looking at it, not with pride, but with recognition, as if she was seeing something she had overlooked for far too long. Outside, miles away now, the SUV continued through the city, its path steady, its direction certain, and inside, Emily sat quietly, her gaze no longer on the passing lights but forward, calm, grounded, untouched by the noise of what had been left behind. She did not need validation, did not need acknowledgement, because her worth had never depended on the approval of a room that failed to see her. Daniel glanced at her once more, a quiet understanding passing between them, and though neither spoke, there was a shared awareness that moments like that were not about victory or defeat, but about clarity, about revealing something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. The road stretched ahead, open and uninterrupted, and as the vehicle moved forward, it carried none of the weight of what had been left behind, only the quiet certainty of what had been affirmed. Back in the boutique, the lights dimmed slightly as closing time approached, the golden glow softening into something more subdued, and the last customers made their way out, their steps slower, their expressions thoughtful, as if each of them carried a small piece of the lesson they had witnessed. Vanessa remained where she was, the silence around her no longer empty, but full of meaning, and as she looked around the space she once controlled so easily, she understood something that would stay with her far longer